the coronavirus pandemic, which I think you were among the people warning about this very early, I think as early as January, right?
Yeah.
When most people, it wasn't even in their minds. I'm very curious to know how you think the United States would have weathered this pandemic differently if we had a different president, if we had, either a Hillary Clinton or some other sort of more normal, for lack of a better word, Republican like Mitt Romney. Like how different do you think the death count would be? Because I think there are a range of opinions on this. Some people seem to think that but for Trump, we would be doing, as good as South Korea and Singapore. And other people seem to think, Trump is the only reason we're doing as okay as we are. So where do you stand on that?
Well, I've read numerous articles implying or stating explicitly that if only Trump hadn't been president, things would have been much, much better. And I think this is a mistake. James Fallows made this argument in The Atlantic, for example, recently. And James Fallows is a very distinguished journalist. But he seemed to me to take it entirely on trust from his sources in CDC or Centers for Disease Control or the Department of Health and Human Services, that it was all Trump's fault that things went badly. And he seemed to take it on trust from the Obama people he spoke to, that of course they would have handled it much better if it had happened to them. There's actually very little evidence to support those claims. Firstly, it's very clear that the failure that produced bad outcomes in terms of excess mortality in a number of countries, including the United States, the UK as well, Spain, Italy, Belgium, those countries actually had higher excess mortality than the US. They did even worse. But those failures were not really and can't really be attributed to the men or women at the top. They were failures of the public health bureaucracy. And if one actually bothers to do some serious research, rather than just talking to self-interested people who have every reason to lay the blame on Trump, what becomes clear is that there was a terrific failure at CDC, particularly with respect to testing. Can't really see how that was Trump's fault. The intelligence people seem to have done as good a job as they might have of saying there's a problem in Wuhan, we should be worried about this. But the people whose job it was, like the Assistant Secretary for Pandemic Preparedness, were completely missing in action. And I think that the real history, when it comes to be written, will show a tremendous failure of the administrative state, which Trump did nothing to prevent. Perhaps at the margin, he made things even worse with some of his interventions. But it can't really be claimed that it was all down to him. Actually, in January, Trump had a reasonably good impulse, which was to try to stop passengers from China coming to the United States. He was widely criticized in the liberal media for the travel ban. But actually, the only thing wrong with that move was it was too late. It was about 2, maybe 3 weeks too late to really be effective. And it wasn't comprehensive enough because people with green cards and US passports were exempted. But his instincts were not that bad. Whereas actually, the people whose job it was to be ready for a pandemic completely failed. And actually, CDC made matters worse by limiting the number of tests that could be done rather than ramping it up. Now, we know what you should have done because countries did it. South Korea did it, Taiwan did it, a bunch of European countries did reasonably well too. You had to very quickly, even before the Chinese confirmed that there was serious human-to-human spread, start testing people, and then you had to do contact tracing once you found people who were infected. And those things were done successfully in some countries, but they were not done successfully in the US or the UK or in Italy. And indeed, a lot of things were done very wrong. One reason that there was very high excess mortality in the state where you live, New York, as in the UK, as in multiple European countries, was that no effort was made to prevent the virus from getting into elderly care homes. And that explains between a third and a half of the excess mortality. Is it the president's job to make sure that people in elderly care homes in New York State are not vulnerable to a new coronavirus? No, that's not the president's job. So that's the first reason that I'm skeptical. A lot of the people briefing journalists like Fallows are actually from inside DHHS and from CDC. Yeah, they really would love Trump to carry the can for this. But the reality is, this was a failure of the public health bureaucracy. As for the Obama administration, it didn't exactly stop swine flu from spreading throughout the country. And as for its success in dealing with another epidemic, the opioid epidemic, it was a complete failure. Actually, more people died of opioid overdoses in the Obama presidency than have died from COVID-19. And it happened every year throughout his presidency, and each year more people died. So I'm very skeptical about the claim that if COVID-19 had come along, the Obama presidency would have dealt with it brilliantly. There's no evidence to suggest that. As for the counterfactual question, I hope I've kind of answered it. I think if Hillary Clinton had been president, she wouldn't have been doing press conferences in which she extolled the virtues of hydroxychloroquine. She wouldn't have done any of the really foolish things that Trump did, the claims to understand it, the claims that you could reopen by Easter. I don't think Hillary Clinton would have done any of that as president. But would the public health bureaucracy have performed better? I find that really dubious as a claim. I suspect, actually, that the outcome would have been very similar, because what killed people was not really presidential action. What killed people was a fundamental failure to understand the nature of a new coronavirus, fundamental failure to learn the lessons of SARS and MERS. And some countries learned those lessons. It's just that our public health bureaucracy didn't.